Hey guys, welcome back. So now getting back into Nightwing within the year of the villain, which at this point has finally given us a way better understanding of what this whole entire memory loss thing, like the whole purpose of it. So what we're gonna do is dive into it and finally get into the reasoning and the resolve of what just happened and where it puts Richard Grayson. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so prior to this point, we've talked about much of the whole situation that's going on with Rick Grayson, with him only having his memories of his childhood up until the death of his parents, and really with his entire life as Robin, his life as Nightwing, his life as a secret agent, like all of that has been wiped away. But with Bloodhaven still needing a hero, Detective Sapienza, who found all the old Nightwing costumes, he took it upon himself to form this new team Nightwing, which I've expressed before I really don't care much for. But it's come to the point to where Dick Grayson, who now goes by Rick, he's found himself helping them more or less find their way, and with doing so attempting to make them a little bit better so they don't just get killed in the field. But at this point with William Cobb, who has recently come to Bloodhaven with the agenda of reclaiming his great-grandson Rick Grayson, for a good amount of time he's shadowing Rick, but even with doing so he's taken interest into B. Bennett, who at this time is Rick's current love interest, and she's only important to William Cobb because she's important to Rick Grayson. And just to be clear, at this point William Cobb hasn't explained to anyone who he is, and he's vaguely introduced himself to Rick by only really telling him his name, which Rick wouldn't remember anyway. But with him arriving here at the Prodigal Bar and really just doing so to get a feel of who B is, and with doing so he talks to her for a moment, then he leaves. But of course with the streets going crazy like we talked about before, people are still looting and breaking into different buildings, which is one of the main reasons why Rick told B to stay here at the bar anyway. But even with this happening, William Cobb returns and he saves B. And I use the term save loosely because the saving kind of turns into kidnapping. And really just keep in mind that his interest in B is tied back to his great-grandson Richard Grayson, because what William Cobb wanted to seize this opportunity to induct his great-grandson into the Court of Owls, because B is important to Richard, it's like automatically she's important to William Cobb, especially with William Cobb being the last living member of Richard's family, and eventually over time William will want Richard to continue the bloodline. And it's for this reason that he saves B and he takes her in order to lure out Richard so they can have a talk. And so now if you guys remember Zach, who was one of the members of Team Nightwing, who William Cobb beat nearly to the point of death, but of course Richard gets him to a hospital so he didn't die. I know, right? Like, so disappointing. Like, I'm sure a lot of people would have been alright with him not making it. But after taking Zach to the hospital, Richard then goes to check on B. But of course when Richard enters the Prodigal Bar and he sees a bunch of dead street looters with Talon sticking out of them, it really doesn't take a genius to know that the same dude took B. But even with Cobb taking her, he makes it super easy for Richard to find them, because when he takes her, he doesn't like drag her all the way back to Gotham. He just takes her on the roof, ties her up, she's unharmed, and Richard can clearly hear her yelling from the rooftop, which is what causes him to go up there and find her, which is exactly what Cobb wanted. And really with everything else going on, this is the perfect setup for Cobb, so he can have this opportunity to be face to face with Richard Grayson, because as of right now the rest of Team Nightwing is tied up with all the looting in the streets, and one of them still in the hospital. But with Rick coming here, of course Cobb then shows up not long after. And so now here's the thing, like with Cobb showing up and really just laying down the truth thick, like, look, I'm your great grandfather, the time has come for you to join me, so on and so forth. Like essentially initially he just comes off as nuts, and that's really Richard's response, like, dude, are you crazy? If you were my great grandfather you'd beat over 100, and if alive you certainly wouldn't be moving like this. But with the truths that Cobb is speaking about Richard's past, which do line up with the pieces that he's learned about himself during his time here in Bloodhaven, it does cause Richard to kind of question himself, like, okay, like with this huge gap of memory that I'm missing, is it possible that some of this is true? But it's also like you can't blame Rick for not trusting Talon, especially after the whole situation with Zach fighting for his life in the hospital, which is another thing, because if Talon wanted that kid dead, he would be dead. And the same for B, because if he really just wanted to come through Bloodhaven and make the murder count match the name, he would have very much done that prior to this point. But during this time that he's fighting Rick and also trying to explain his point to him, he lets him know first and foremost that Rick is a Grayson and he was born with a different purpose. But of course through the years with Richard being trained by Batman, he fights with what Talon refers to as a weakness or a limitation, because Richard does not fight to kill. But Talon like, that's alright, we finna fix that, because from this night forward Richard Grayson is going to finally be with his true family. But just before he gets into the details of how so, like, and trust me, we're gonna get into that, but just before he does, the sign of Perpetua fills the sky, and of course B and Richard have no idea what this means, but it's pretty obvious that it's not a good thing, because it's like when you see that sign in the sky, you may not know what you're looking at for like the average person, but you know good and well that ain't no rainbow. And for the record, for anyone who's just stumbling onto this channel for the first time, I have a Justice League playlist down in the description that'll fill you in on all of that, and that'll better prepare you for Year of the Villain, which we are in the thick of. But trust me, that playlist will get you caught up in a matter of a few hours. And trust me, you really do gotta know what's going on there before you even understand or start to understand why that sign is in the sky. But either way, with them seeing this, Talon is the only one who isn't tripping out, mainly because, like we talked about before, he made his agreement with Lex, who already persuaded Talon to side with Doom. But it isn't until this point where Talon reveals his identity as William Cobb, to whom prior to this point, this is how he approached Richard Grayson. And I mean also prior to the point of William Cobb nearly killing Zack as well. Like, Cobb had intentionally bumped into Richard a few days before all this. But so now what happens here, like, okay, this is where it gets crazy. But what happens here is William Cobb then puts these goggles on Richard, and what these goggles are designed to do are to fill in Richard's memories all the way back from his parents' death up until now, which I know sounds crazy, but before you trip, we come to find out that this is actually something that has been in the works for quite some time now. And so now for starters, just to be clear, these memories that are being given to Richard, they are very different from the way things actually played out from his parents' death up to this point. And so now to really get down into the details of what this means and what William Cobb has been doing in the background prior to this point, we have got to get into Nightwing Annual number 2, because this annual filled in so many of the gaps, and it really did a number on explaining like what's been going on, and I mean like what's truly been going on with Richard Grayson since he was shot by KG Beast. And so now with this, going back to Richard's time in the hospital in Gotham, to where the doctor who was overseeing his recovery, Dr. Isabella Haas, who of course was the best that money can buy, which is the reason that Bruce had paid the flyer in from Switzerland so that she could look after Richard and bring him back to full recovery. But of course, where Bruce, Alfred, Barbs, and Damian went to go see Richard, as we know, he didn't recognize any of them. And at the time, Bruce had asked to have the room because at the time he just figured that this was Dick trying not to blow his cover, and Bruce wanted to give him the opportunity to be alone and speak freely. But even with doing so, there was no change, and this is when Bruce started to realize like, okay, this is real, because not only does he not recognize Bruce or anyone else, but even at this point he's demanding to be called by his first name like his mother used to call him, Richard. And so now, as you would expect, Bruce refuses to accept this and even tells Dr. Haas that if she just can't fix it, then he'll find somebody else better. But that's just the problem, because she is the best that there is, and she knows it. So what she ends up doing after this is she ends up recommending that Richard goes over to Bruce's home, because Bruce was the one who took him in when Richard was young, and perhaps revisiting Wayne Manor would help jog some of his memories and help him with his recovery. And with doing so, she stays outside and telling Richard the reason why is because she doesn't want to get in the way of his progress. But when Richard gets inside, he quickly expresses to Alfred that this place doesn't feel like home. Like, it really just feels large and empty and cold, likely because all of the marble. But not long after that, when Alfred takes him down to the Batcave, of course it initially comes off pretty creepy, but when Richard goes down into the Batcave, one of the first things that they show him is his old Nightwing suit which he wore on the night that he was shot, and it still has the blood on it. And it's like, leave it to Bruce to do something like that. And I'm kind of surprised it wasn't sitting next to like a Jason Todd Bloody Robin suit as well. But anytime we see something like this, it always puts me in the mindset of, okay, Bruce is doing this for himself, like as a reminder, but going forward in an attempt to help Richard remember, and doing so by showing him the night that he was shot, which was pretty much the surveillance footage from the roof of GCPD. Richard had a very normal reaction because he freaked out. And it's like, sure, part of what you're doing is trying to help, but the delivery in which it's being done is terrible, because a method that would help Bruce Wayne is not going to help everybody else the same way. Like, communication just doesn't work like that. And of course, when this happens, it freaks Richard out, he leaves upset, and he gets Dr. Haas to take him out of there. But one of the things that we discover unbeknownst to Bruce, and trust me, this will all make sense in a little bit, but one of the things that was happening, like, Dr. Haas had brought Richard here in order to build a bigger contrast from what Richard describes as home and what Wayne Manor actually is. Because prior to his parents' death, the only place that felt like home was with his parents, or even the times he visited his grandparents, because this time was always warm and welcoming. And one of the reminders of this was a book called The Friendly Owl, which was passed down to him because it was a book that his mother really loved. And as we know, of course, his mother's obsession with owls due to his family ties with the Court of Owls. But what ends up happening, and the way that things really begin to unfold here, is when Dr. Haas recommends for Richard to return to Bloodhaven to continue his recovery, but with doing so, she also hands him a copy of the book The Friendly Owl, mentioning that it's a book that she also loved as a child, and that she wants Richard to have it in order to help him along the way with his recovery. But here's the thing, like, here's the kicker, because when she hands him the book and sends him him on his way to Bloodhaven, which on the surface seems very harmless, and it sounds logical enough as well. But when he leaves her office, this is when we find out that Dr. Haas has been a part of the Court of Owls this whole time, and on top of that they've been listening to every single session. But that's not even the craziest part, because this whole time, like, Dr. Haas has been treating Richard and intentionally suppressing his memories, specifically back to the point in time of the death of his parents, and she had been doing this whole time in order to prep him so that during this time with this selective amnesia, he would stay in a place where only his blood family felt like home. And with this procedure, like, all of his memories as Robin, as Nightwing, his memories of Bruce, Barb, all of those are there, but they've been deeply suppressed. But with Dr. Haas doing this and suppressing those memories and then sending him to Bloodhaven, this then presented the space and opportunity for William Cobb to bring the goggles, which would instill within Richard new memories as if he had been raised as an assassin instead. And with doing this, the Owls are essentially making a majority of his life a lie. And of course, this is the life that William Cobb had wanted Dick Grayson to have, but it wasn't. But also, with doing this and taking away the restraint and the teaching that he was given to Bruce as far as not killing anyone, this essentially makes Richard Grayson a lethal weapon. And part of the program to make this memory stick, which they partially implanted through his fake memories with giving him the memories of killing Bruce, but part of the process which Dr. Haas has explained to make this stick is that he actually has to kill so that he can believe that he can. And in the case of Richard Grayson, who better to start with than Team Nightwing, who the Court of Owls have ordered to be eliminated by Richard Grayson himself, which once again, I'm okay with that, but we'll have to wait and see if this actually goes down. But through all of this is what's been going on with Nightwing and why. And I gotta tell you, I feel a lot better because months ago, like when we was getting into this, I didn't have no idea where it was going. And I'm not going front, like, it feels so much better now that this narrative really has like a purpose. It has a perceivable end game, and it's like it no longer feels like DC has just thrown Nightwing in their back pocket and just forgotten about him. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.